why do you think it's difficult for Arab or Middle Eastern men to open up?
We come from an environment that's still very much the one of the man is the strong, silent, stoic type. You could be a powerful man and still express emotions. You could still be a powerful man and show that you're hurt, show that you're sad. You don't have to wait for a funeral to cry. You don't have to wait for a funeral to say, I loved brother, son, daughter, sister, mother. You can say those words to somebody now, and you're no less of a man for saying it.
Welcome to another episode of Yalla, Let's Talk. Today we have with us none other than Samir Mourani. Samir is an entrepreneur and an editor of Gent's Post. He also is the host and producer of Gent's Talk. So welcome, Mr. Samir Mourani.
Thanks for having me, buddy.
People don't know this, but we actually met a week ago?
A week, yeah. It was a week ago we met, and then we were supposed to meet for 20 minutes, half an hour at most, for coffee. And then we ended up having an hour and a half long conversation about life and philosophy and just all sorts of stuff.
That's when you know you had a good conversation. And that's why I was like, we need to continue that conversation today, because after that conversation with you, you made me realize how important it is to talk about mental health and explore it within the men's sphere.
Yeah.
Right? And what I appreciate about what you do with Gent's Talk is that you are redefining masculinity and really creating that space for men to talk about mental health. And you talk a lot about fragility of a man's ego. And I want to start off with that. What brought you to that topic, and why is it important for you to explore that on your podcast as well as online?
Okay, so the first thing that you said that really stuck out is redefining masculinity. And the ethos of both the podcast and the lifestyle publication Gent's Post is to redefine masculinity for the modern man. Now, in today's landscape, when people hear redefining masculinity, people tend to get their backs up against the wall. They're like, what does that mean? And when we interviewed Russell Peters, even he was like, what does that mean? Explain that to me. And the idea isn't to tell people this is a man, this is not a man. The idea is to redefine masculinity in a way where men can start to open up about conversations, about topics that bother them. And when it comes to the ego, for example, that's a huge sore spot for a lot of men, because ego is where we get a lot of our testosterone driven, I'm the macho man, I'm the powerful man, I'll never show emotion, I'll be stoic, I'll be the strong, silent type. And when I was growing up, I'd watch mafia movies with my father, and that was the definition of a man: the Marlon Brando, the Al Pacino, the Robert De Niro's, strong, stoic, silent types. And then life gets in the way. Life happens. And in 2020, during the pandemic, a lot of men lost their distractions, right? With lockdowns. They couldn't go out, they couldn't date, they couldn't go to the gym, they couldn't watch sports. And a lot of men had to face their demons. They had to sit there, look in the mirror, face their demons. And I certainly had to do that. 2020 was a very big year for me. A lot of changes that happened. And I had to look in the mirror and decide, was I happy with the man that I was in that moment? Would the younger version of me, if I was able to look into the future, would I be proud of that version? And in the future, would I look back on me and say, I'm proud of the way I handle that? If the answer is no to either of those questions, you need to change something about your life. And I realized in the moment the answer was no to both questions. So I decided I need to recalibrate. I need to strip down my identity and better understand who I was, what I was becoming, and what I really wanted to be. And to do that, you got to throw your ego out the window, because that requires you really look inside and you really pull that layer back and realize that there's a lot of stuff in there that you're probably holding on to that you should have been dealing with for a long time.
I loved a few of the things. Actually, I loved everything you just said, but there's a few things I just want to dissect a little better. One is that this moment of realization when you're like, this is not where I want to go. What advice would you have for someone who might not be aware that this is not the right path for them?
I don't believe that people are not aware that they're not on the right path. I really do believe, and I say that because hindsight is 2020. When I look back, I was intentionally choosing not to look within. I was very much surface level. What you saw was what you got. There was nothing else behind it. And I love that idea about myself. But as I look back, I realized that I always knew deep down that there were things that I was unhappy about, right? And things that I needed to change to become a better man. And so my advice to people to men specifically, who are in that position, who know that there's something that's not right, talk about it. Try to figure out what it is that you're unhappy about. And it's okay to be unhappy. There's nothing wrong with that. The idea is to figure out why you're unhappy so you can become happy.
And how did you figure out that you were not happy?
Oof. There was a lot of changes in my life. It started with, a relationship breaking down. Obviously the pandemic, being locked down, you couldn't do anything, you couldn't go anywhere. So it was just me by myself, sort of figuring out my own thoughts. It's just kept going from there, job insecurities, financial insecurities, trying to understand like, where is this world going? Like 2020 was a very scary year for a lot of people.
A tough year, yeah.
But I look back now and I say 2020 was the best year of my life because it forced me to undergo the changes I never wanted to deal with. And it put me on a path towards better understanding who I was, who I wanted to become. And then at the same time, sort of discovering if I felt this way and I can overcome this fear and overcome that journey, then there's a ton of other men out there who are in similar positions or will be in similar positions at some point who can also overcome that.
I love that. The pandemic and how you were feeling at that time is inspiring you and fueling you to what you're doing now with all the work you're doing with Gent's Post and Gent's Stock. That's incredible. And it's incredible to hear. What I want to now go back to is mental health. You've touched a lot about how you used to approach mental health in the past. How would you say you're approaching it now as, the self-aware human who is now doing all these great things? How are you approaching mental health today?
Honesty. And it's not easy because you end up looking in the deepest, darkest corners of your mind, and you understand that not everything is okay sometimes. And I'll give you a very basic example. Right a week before Christmas, my father ended up going to the emergency room.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear
And thankfully he's okay now. Okay, thankfully. But he went to the emergency room and one thing led to another, and we got the worst possible diagnosis we could possibly get. Thankfully, that was just an initial diagnosis and he's recovered and he's at home and all of these things. But it was such a traumatic moment. And the honest conversation I had to have with myself is that even though that happened now a month ago almost, I don't think I've completely resolved the trauma that came from hearing that, your father might not make it into the next week. And that level of honesty that you have to have with yourself before anybody else requires you to understand that there's something that's not sitting right and you have to deal with it. Now, whether that means taking a break, whether that means exercising more, talking to someone, doing the things that make you passionate, whatever that is, figure that out because that will help you. Now, old version of Samir would have pretended like that never happened. Like, oh, he's good, we're good, I'm good, I'm not going anywhere, that's it. Move on.
So it's really approaching and being direct and being honest with yourself and asking yourself the real questions like, hey, am I okay? As opposed to just dismissing it.
100%. And a lot of men dismiss it. And that's the biggest problem, especially Middle Eastern men, because we're notorious for that. And I think in a lot of cultures that happens too for men. But just speaking from personal perspectives, because I'm from Lebanon and I've grown up in an Arab household and I've seen the strong, stoic, silent types, approaching it from a lens of vulnerability and understanding that when something's not wrong, just do something about it because it's okay. If you feel like breaking down, there's nothing unmanly about breaking down. Trust me. It's very therapeutic. There's nothing wrong with sharing with someone that you trust to say, hey, I'm not feeling right, right? I'm in a dark place. I need some help. Because if you feel that way, chances are there's other people that feel the same way, and you might even be able to connect with someone on a whole other level.
Just being honest with yourself and being authentic and expressing your emotions, that does draw a lot of people a lot stronger together. I like the fact that you mentioned how coming from a cultural background, such as being Arab or Middle Eastern, there is this expectation. There's an expectation to be emotionless. There's expectation to man up, and it's often celebrated. How does that narrative impact Middle Eastern and Arab men today?
It ends up hurting them more than anything else, because they go the majority of their lives, the prime years of their lives, living in almost denial that there's something wrong. Either they're unhappy in their relationships, they're unhappy at work, maybe they never pursued that career, that dream job that they always wanted because their parents pressured them into something else. Maybe they never told that person that they cared about them, instead they held it in. And what ends up happening is they go through their life almost like a zombie, pushing all that down as much as possible. And one day it'll all come right up at the worst possible time, or they'll get to a point where they're in their like late stages of their lives, sitting there in regret. And why would you want that? Like, we've all experienced some form of regret. We felt that in one way or another. Why would you want to get to a point in your life when you should be enjoying the fruits of your labor and sitting there thinking, I wish I said this. I wish I showed up better this way. I wish I didn't do that.
I can definitely appreciate that. And I do think there's a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves because this is the expectation. Like, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to have this career, you got to be strong for your family. And so all these different expectations coupled with exactly what you were saying in terms of we live in a culture that's very preventative, like you can't do this versus you should express those emotions. Like, no, you can't express that. And I find that a lot of guys, and at least I can speak for myself, when you're in that state of mind, you just tend to be, I wouldn't even say the word depressed, but it's more of like this sense of you just living day by day without actually realizing there's so much to life than just following that path that you think is the only path there is.
100%. And it's sad. It's sad when you meet people who are there's so much to them, right?
Yeah.
Like they could be super passionate about something, or they're just such an amazing character to be around. But you can tell, it's so easy to tell that a person is dealing with something, right? There's an impulse to want to share with you. And I found one of the tricks, I'll call it a trick, but one of the closest men in my life now, who's like a brother to me, taught me this strategy, I'll call it, where if you lead a conversation with vulnerability, that person will reciprocate because they now feel comfortable and they feel safe, which is why whenever I'm on set and I'm talking to my guests, before the cameras start rolling, I always try to share something about myself, because then it lets their guard down and they better understand, okay, I can actually share something about me now.
So what would you like to share about yourself today that some people don't necessarily know?
The last 2.5-3 years were an incredible roller coaster. I've probably been at the lowest point in my life, and I've probably had the highest points in my life at the same time. And I know that life is somewhere in the middle. It's never as high or as low as it might feel. I've made some amazing friendships. I'm in an amazing relationship with someone who pushes me to continue to be vulnerable and to share and to be open to those conversations. I feel like now I can show up better as a man for my family, in my career, in anything I do. I can be more authentic and I can show up more honestly. And that's something that's not easy to do. And I can sit here now and be like, look at how honest and authentic I am, because a lot of people like to show off this facade of like, I'm this mental health advocate and I do all these things, but deep down they haven't resolved very many things. And I still have a lot of work to do. And that's the reality of being honest with yourself, is taking stock of where you're at in your journey and realizing I still have to complete so many more things to get to a point where I can say that I am now comfortable in my own skin.
I think the key word you just said here, it's a journey. It's an ongoing journey.
It never stops.
It never does.
No.
It never does.
You're always learning. And we see it from our parents, right? We see where their limitations are, not because they're not capable, but because they're limited by the circumstances of their lives. Like a lot of Middle Eastern parents, especially first generation immigrants, their biggest priorities was just coming to Canada. Right?
Absolutely.
They were just, how do I get my family somewhere safe? I don't have time to worry about all this other stuff. We have that luxury. So I used to get mad at my father a lot because I would think of him and go, like, why couldn't you be more this or that? And I realized that his main priority was just making sure that I was able to go to school, I could eat, and I had clothes. Everything else was a luxury.
It's and I like the word luxury because it is a luxury and it is a privilege that we have, because when they've come to Canada, like you said, their biggest priority is coming to a safe place, getting a citizenship, making sure that they have something stable and growing and stable for us.
Yeah.
Where when we have that stability, now we can think, okay, what's next for us? Like, how do we self-actualize? What do we really want? What is our purpose? How do we take care of our mental health? So it's interesting to see, because I do think right now, even though like our parents' generation is starting to realize the importance of mental health, and it is becoming destigmatized, but I don't think it's understood in the same light. I think for them, mental health means, at least this is what I've seen, it means like being happy, self-care. Whereas for us, it might mean like, how do we become more emotionally mature? How do we exceed into new heights? Perhaps tap into therapy, reflect, journaling. So I do even think mental health has different definitions between those generations. And this actually is going to bring me to my next point. And the next question I have is, coming from a Middle Eastern or an Arab background, we don't necessarily see our parents using the tools to access mental health resources or are aware of what mental health really is, right? And so for a lot of people who might even be just coming from outside of Canada and who might have immigrated, they may not necessarily know where to access these resources or how to approach mental health in general, because we lack that modeling behavior of our parents. What advice would you have for those people?
Honestly, the best advice I can give someone is something that I experienced myself. And I want to preface this by saying that I'm not a mental health expert, a psychoanalyst, or anything like that. But I'm a human being who's gone through traumatic moments in his life, who had to sort of learn to overcome those and then find his way. And the lessons that I can share, or the things that you can do, start with talking to someone. It's the biggest thing. And I think we undervalue how big that is. Talking to someone, especially someone that doesn't know you. And that's where I always recommend therapy to people. And before, therapy had this negative connotation of like only people who go to therapy. But the reality is we can all use it even when we're feeling okay. Because sometimes talking to someone that doesn't know you and has no biases can give you a sobering perspective on your situation, whatever that is. But it also includes surrounding yourself with the right people. You are a representation of the people in your circle. When you're surrounded by people who don't talk about these things, when you're feeling anxious or panicky or not well, they don't help lift you up, but instead they emphasize those problems for you. Those are not the right people to have in your circle. Now, you can have friends like that, but what you really need are really close people that you can confide in.
I get what you're saying. So even when it comes to having a group of friends, as long as you have or surround yourself with people who you can actually open up to, people who can understand you and create a safe space for you to express your emotions
100%,
and whatever state of life there is, that's key. And if you don't have that, go and get it.
100%. And it sounds easy, like just go get it. But it starts with figuring out the people who are already in your circle. Who can you actually have a conversation with?
So it's interesting because I was thinking about that the other day, because I was thinking I'm very blessed. I have incredible friends. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, how do we create more like safer spaces? And I feel like it starts off within ourselves. So as opposed to thinking like, oh, who do I go to and seek that from? Why not go and actually create that for somebody? And so just very recently, I was talking to one of my friends and I was like telling him something I was very anxious about. And then I stopped and I just stopped talking. And I was like, okay, what about you? How's everything going with you? And he's like, Hani, you got to stop saying that and doing that. He's like, if you do that, then it just means I can't come to you if I have something I'm anxious about. Like, we're here to create a space for each other. And when he said that and he validated it, I'm like, that's incredible, because
It's powerful.
it's very powerful.
Yeah.
And when he did that to me, the next person I went to and they were talking and either complaining, where sometimes you might, if you know one of your buddies starts complaining, you'll be like, yo, like stop talking, like, you know what I mean, like just stop complaining and enjoy the rest of the day kind of thing. But I was like, you know what, let me actually create that space for them, not say anything and just listen, right? And it was a very powerful experience, even doing it on the other side.
Why did you stop? When you first told your friend your situation, you started to tell him, then you stopped yourself. Why did you stop?
I think there's two things. One is that because you don't want to ever burden someone with what you're going through, you're like, okay, this person should not be listening to my problems. I need to go to my therapist and tell them my issues. And then the second thing, I do think it's also a subconscious level. There is that image that we put for ourselves. I don't want to be perceived as someone who is coming with negativity, because we have all seen these friends and have had these people where their energy might not be the most positive.
Right.
And I wouldn't want to do that. And I think there's a difference between, and this is something I've realized very recently, being negative, but also creating a space within within your friend circle to expressing your emotions and working through things.
And I'm glad you said you didn't want to burden them. And the reason I say that is because one of the things that I had to learn when I always felt like I was burdening someone with whatever was ailing me, I had to learn that that's not up to me to decide if I'm burdening them. That's up to them. So if I'm telling you how I feel about something, I'm coming to you and I'm expressing vulnerability. It's on you to tell me if it's too much for you. And if you don't tell me and you're my friend, then I should understand that as my friend, you're willing to sit there and listen. And so once you remove that obstacle from your mind, it makes it easier for you to get the information out, to share it. And then as you share your vulnerability, it encourages them to turn around and start to share their vulnerability back with you.
What you just said there is so beautiful, is that it's up to them to consider it as a burden. Because you're right, because how many times do we go to someone, whether it's a friend or family member, and we're like, I don't want to burden them with this news, but it really is up to them.
And what we're really doing is projecting. We're projecting how we think they may feel, when in reality, we have no reason to know that. Unless they said to us, hey, this is too much, there's no reason for us to think that. But that's our own brain acting against itself to be like, nope, you shouldn't say anything.
Very true. And if you flip that and you ask yourself, if that friend came to me with that issue, how would I feel? And I'd be like, of course, I'm gonna
come
listen
over,
to them.
tell me, like, let's spend 3-4 hours talking, as long as you need, I'm here for you, type of thing. Exactly.
Yeah,
It's just flipping that narrative and allowing yourself to understand that you can share these things with the closest people in your circle. And in doing that, if you realize that they're not able to receive that, then that's how you know that this person is not somebody in your circle that you can have these kinds of conversations with.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe these friends can just be the friends you go out with and have fun with, and they can have that purpose in your life, but not the ones who are going to contribute to your emotional health.
100%. And there's nothing wrong with
Yeah.
that, right? Like you can have friends that serve different purposes, right? And it's not that you're using them. It's that they bring certain types of value to your life. Some are, you want to go out and have a good time.
Yeah.
This is the person to call. You want to have a raw emotional conversation with someone because you've just had a week from hell. This is the person that you call. And you've got different people, because one of the things I've learned from one of the guests on the pod, her name is Dr. Jess, was you can't expect one person. And as men, we do this often. We burden our partners to be the sole recipient of our emotional, mental, sexual, physical, everything, all those needs. We burden one person. We expect one person to be the recipient of all of that. In reality, you need a circle of people that you can relay information with.
Interesting. So you're right. And it's generally, if that person is in a romantic relationship, that is the person that they will burden. And that's the person that they're going to express their emotions. Even though that person should not be their therapist, it should be one
100%.
of many people that they can confide in.
Exactly. And you can confide in your partner. Like, I confide in my girlfriend all the time. That's okay. But there are times where I need to have a conversation with one of my men, and I'll give them a call. I'll pick up the phone. I'll call them and I'll say, are you busy? And they'll go, if they're busy, they'll say to me, it's funny. They'll go, If this is important, I'll drop what I'm doing. If it's not, I'll call you back. And let's say I say it's important. They'll say, okay, give me a minute. I just have to put something on hold and come back. We'll have the conversation, and it's like a weight's been lifted, because I can't consistently put whatever that weight is just on that one person. And that's where a community of close friends comes in.
Having a community is key.
100%.
And I like how you said, you talk to your girlfriend, your partner for one thing, but then you still have your homies, your homeboys for another. And I just want to focus on that. Why is it different to confide in these different genders for different things? And what can you give us an example of some things you would go for your girlfriend versus like the guys in your life?
Okay. I'll do that by going backwards a second. I've been in relationships where I've never been able to confide certain things in my partner because I was uncertain as to how they would receive it, right? If I said this to her, she might react this way. And so instead of actually going through that hard conversation, just saying, hey, I need to talk to you, here's the situation, I chose to internalize it. The only person that suffered as a result of that was me. And so in this scenario now, fast forward, I can now go to, let's say, one of my men and say, hey, Lou, hey, Chris, hey, Dan, hey, Ray, I'm having this situation. I need to talk to you about something. And it might be work related. It might be, hey, you know what? I'm thinking of starting a new business venture. I need some input. And one of them is an expert, let's say. But the whole point is I'm able to confide in them in some ways that I also just can't confide in my girlfriend, and vice versa, right? Not because, and I said I can't, what I meant to say is that there's certain people that are better equipped to handle certain conversations.
So it's not necessarily because of genders, it's just who is it around you in 100%,
life. Yeah. Because like I can, one of my closest friends is this lady that I worked with for 6 months. And she's become one of my closest confidants because I've confided in her for now the last 3 years about a number of different topics, because she has this maternal element to her. And I feel safe when I go and I talk to her, and my girlfriend knows her. And it's just like this understanding that in some scenarios I will go and ask her advice. And then in other scenarios, I'll ask my girlfriend, or in other scenarios, I'll ask one of my guys.
I like that. You're creating a whole ecosystem for mental health support. And if everyone can just do that, I think we would be living in a much more emotionally healthy state.
I think so, especially now.
Especially
there's
now.
A lot of noise around us. There's a lot of, do this, do that.
So why do you think it's difficult for Arab or Middle Eastern men to open up?
That's a fantastic question. That's it. It's a cultural thing. It's a generational thing, because when I talk to my father, for example, he tells me how, his father and grandfather were even more reserved and even more closed off to these topics. And my father, as he's gotten older, has started to open up more. And obviously I'm trying to do that. And the idea is one day when I have a son, I can have those conversations with him, and he can start to open up to these conversations a lot younger than I did. And I really think it's a generational cultural thing, because we come from an environment that's still very much the one of the man is the strong, silent, stoic type. You could be a powerful man and still express emotions. You could still be a powerful man and show that you're hurt, show that you're sad. You don't have to wait for a funeral to cry. You don't have to wait for a funeral to say, I loved brother, son, daughter, sister, mother. You can say those words to somebody now, and you're no less of a man for saying it.
Dude, I am speechless. Like, I am so happy I asked that question. But you're absolutely,
I've thought about it a lot.
Yeah.
In my sort of journey, I just kept thinking to myself, like, is it easier for one culture over the other? Like, does one do it better? Is there a reason why it's so inherently difficult for Middle Eastern men to have these conversations? And the real answer is it's the same for everybody. But Middle Eastern men in general still to this day convey this facade, this persona that I can't express emotions. I can't show you that I care about you. Like, we still behave like when you were younger, and if you liked a girl, the way you would show her is by being mean to her and like making fun of her. And it was like all this whole cute thing of doing it. Sometimes we still behave that way as adults.
As I say,
We
someone
show
is,
people affection by joking and poking at them. When in reality, just tell them, hey man, I missed you. Like every man in my circle now that I truly care and love, when I see them, I hug them. When I say goodbye, I tell them I love them. Because
damn,
I'm
I like that.
expressing to them that this is how I feel about them. Because there's very different forms of love. You can love a brother, you can love a friend, and you can love your partner all very differently. It's not just one or the other.
If everyone can just do that, I think we would be living in a much more emotionally healthy state.
I think so, especially now. Like
Especially
there's a
now.
lot of noise around us. There's a lot of, do this, do that. Social media is a giant facade for, it's a highlight reel of people's lives. They think what
Absolutely.
they see online is what the person is doing every day
And
of
we
their
all
life.
know it's not. It's a filtered reality as
100%.
best as it can
It's
be.
a movie without the boring parts.
The movie without the boring parts. I like that. You get to pick and choose which parts you show in your life.
I get to choose,
Yeah.
like I post, for example, stories of me doing stuff at the gym because, I've gotten messages from other people being like, hey, thanks for doing that. It's actually motivated me to go to the gym. So I'm like, okay, great. If that does that, then I'll continue to do
Is that the real reason why you're posting?
Yes, it is.
You're motivating people to go to the gym.
Only honestly, I did it for a long time for the wrong reasons. I did it because I'm like, look at me working
Yeah.
out. Look at how I'm getting toned and
Because
whatever.
that's why I would post it. But
Right. But there's nothing wrong with that because you're seeking validation that way. And I did that for a long time too. And to some extent, I'm still doing that. There's nothing wrong with that because we all do it. But I've also gotten the messages of like, there's this one message that I won't forget that I got. He messaged me and he's like, today's my birthday. I was out drunk last night and I felt like crap this morning. And rather than just staying in bed all day, I saw the story and it's reminded me that I need to be doing something. So I'm going to go to the gym later. And I'm like, okay. But the point I was going to make was I post these stories of being at the gym. To the average person, you see that and you think, oh, this guy's always at the gym because every time he has a story, he's at the gym. When in reality, I'm going maybe 3 or 4 times a week. And it's just, it's all about how people choose to show you what's going on in their lives.
it's very true. It's very true. Because like they will never showcase like, hey, I failed at this. Hey, I failed at that. But it's gonna be like, hey, look at what I've done. Or like,
Yeah.
hey, look who I am. You take a selfie. It's probably out of the 100 selfies you took, that was the best
That
one.
was the one.
And
yeah.
like, wow. This
And you looked
person-
at it for like 5 straight minutes.
Yeah.
Like, do I like the way my face looks in that one?
Yeah, it's definitely a filtered reality.
But that's also why social media is so. Social media itself is not the problem. It's how we use it. That's the problem.
Absolutely.
Right? It's just a tool.
Yeah, but I don't think people are aware of the negative impact social media has. Like we've all heard, you can use it for good information and like access this and all that, but there's still an element where you're scrolling and you are observing, and it might not be direct, but it is in the back of your mind, like what those expectations of how your lifestyle is going to look like, how you're going to look like physically, like so many different things. And that's where I think social media is dangerous when you're not aware. But if you're self-aware and you go through it and you're like, hey, I'm going to take a step back. This is not real.
Which is why it's so
Yeah.
impactful on younger children.
What do you think an emotionally healthy man looks like?
I'll tell you what I think that looks like. And that can differ based on who's answering the question. But I think an emotionally healthy man is a man who recognizes that he can recognize. I think an emotionally healthy man is a man who can recognize when he's not okay.
The self-awareness.
Exactly. A man who can recognize that he needs a moment to reflect, a moment to seek help, a moment to reach out. Too many men are ignoring that, and too many men are taking their lives. We're seeing too many comedians, actors, people that look super happy on the outside, and then next thing you know, this person's taken their life. And it's such a sad thing because we're losing too many men to things that we could, I don't want to say easily resolve, but if they had someone that they could reach out to or talk to, or if there was more, a bigger push from our communities and our societies to say, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to feel like today is the worst day of your life. But no matter how bad it gets, please don't think of harming yourself, because tomorrow is a new day and you are the master of your destiny. You have the ability to rewrite the next chapter of your life. And there's too many men that we're losing as a result of not knowing what to do in their deepest, darkest moments.
Way too many. And that was beautifully said. It's really sad to see a lot of these guys go throughout their lives trying to keep up this image, trying to be this man that everyone expects them to be, without taking time to actually check in with themselves and know that there is a whole community out there that will support them, that will listen to them and be there. And this now leads me to my next question, is what you're doing now, which is Gent Stock.
Yeah.
So tell us a little more about Gent Stock and what you hope to accomplish with your own podcast.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the first time I smiled so far in this conversation, but as soon as you said Gent Stock, it makes me so happy to think about it, because the idea of Gent Talk is having raw and authentic conversations with the rising stars and the leading gents of different industries. And the reason we intentionally chose that is because it's one thing for, a person like me to just go on a mic and start talking to people, and I don't have an audience. I don't, not a lot of people know who I am. But when you get someone like Russell Peters, a legendary Canadian comedian who's changed our culture, when you get, one of Team Canada's superstars who just played in Qatar for the FIFA World Cup, when you get a celebrity chef, when you get a Canadian Olympic legend, all willing to talk about the hardships of their lives, the challenges of their careers, their deepest, darkest secrets, there's no way any other man should not be able to have those kinds of conversations. And once we did that, once we had that first conversation with Russell Peters, the way I knew this was going to actually work out was I had asked him what he had done during the pandemic. Like, what have you been up to? And his response was, I was in some of the darkest moments of my life. Him and his ex had just split up, and I guess she had taken his kid with her, sorry. And he's like, I'm sitting in this 12,000 square foot house with not a single photo of my son. And he's like, I realized in that moment I was in the darkest place of my life. And when someone like Russell Peters so openly shares that, I knew immediately that we were like meant to do this, right? Because ever since we've had that conversation with Russell, we've now had 27 other conversations and counting. We've had 27 other conversations where I know everybody can go viral on TikTok and everything, but I still think, getting 5.5 million views across 27 episodes is massive, especially for this topic. And more recently, we are now the first podcast video series to be featured on all domestic and international Air Canada flights. So the minute you're on an Air Canada flight, you can now watch the Gent Talk series, which is a first in Canada. And one of the execs at Air Canada saw our interview with Wes Hall, who's on CBC's Dragon's Den. He loved the episode. He ended up binging the entire first season. He reached out the next day and said, how do we get this on our flights?
That is incredible. So you like projected, I don't chase, I attract energy, went for it, started a movement, and then boom.
Yeah, and it's incredible because it took a village. It took the community to put this together. It started with, my business partner, Steven Bronco, like coming up with the idea for Gent's Post.
Yeah.
And then that converted or transitioned into Gent's Talk. I know everyone always likes to thank their sponsors, but at the very beginning when I'm like, hey, here's an idea, we reached out to Zara and her team at Belova and said, maybe you can help us out with a little bit of dollars so we can actually fund this. And she's like, yeah, absolutely. And it takes a whole team to put something like this together. And there has to be a willingness, especially on the parts of guests. And we've had guests turn to us and say, like the headset comes off, the mic gets turned off. They turn to me and they go, thank you. This was very therapeutic for me. And it's so incredible when you hear these celebrities, these music icons, these actors, these athletes turn to you and be like, thank you. And it just reinforces that there is a need for these conversations for men in this space.
Absolutely. And like I said, you created a whole movement of men openly talking about this and actually reflecting on it. And I want to just ask you, how does that make you feel seeing all these guys who are these incredible household names come on your show and tell you like, hey, this was therapeutic?
It's humbling.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where when I said the highs of the last 3 years, this is definitely one of them, because it makes me realize that it's validation for all the work, the grind and effort that I put in over the last 3 years to get to a better place, to get to a place in my life where I can be comfortable in my own skin, happy with where I'm at as a man, as a partner, as a friend, as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And just say, you know what? All of that hard work, all those nights where you're just like, I'm not doing this, and this is not going anywhere, I don't want to do anything anymore. This is what it's led to.
Yeah.
And it's validation for me that that hard work has paid off in one way or another.
I love that. And this is something from my first conversation with you, and now my second conversation with you, is what I realized is that the moment you start being really authentic and reflecting on what your mission is and what you really want to accomplish, versus like, hey, I want to do this, or I want to have a podcast, versus like, what is my mission? And when I talk to you, it's very clear what your mission is. And it is very refreshing and inspiring, because we need more people to create safe spaces. We need more men to talk about this. And we need even the opposite gender, like women, to even understand some of our nuances as well. And also vice versa. We also need to understand, like, everyone needs to understand each other. That's when we started living in a more empathetic world and scale up as a community as well.
100%. And it's funny because we actually get a lot of DMs from men to say, thank you for this. I learned a lot. I appreciate it. Can you talk about this topic or that topic? And then we get a lot of public messages from women being like, this is great. It's so refreshing to hear men talk about these things, because as much as men want to move in that direction, women also want us to move in that direction as well, so that we can become better emotionally equipped to be in a relationship, to be a parent, like to be a friend, to be a better brother, a son, a father, all of those things. And that's why I commend you on the stuff you're doing here, because this is a conversation for around Middle Eastern men right now. Like, we're having this two Middle Eastern men are having this conversation about mental health.
Yo, Gent stock meets Yalla stock.
Exactly.
Yo, fist bump right there.
No, 100% though. It requires people to say, you know what? I see the wall. I don't like it. I'm going to break down this barrier.
And I love that, because we do need to have more meaningful conversations where, in whatever ecosystems, I should say, communities. And the more people that do this, the more, again, we start scaling up as a community. We start understanding each other. And I'm really excited to see what's going to be in store for you, for Yalla stock, for Gent stock, for everyone who's trying to really make a positive impact in this world. This is something I genuinely do believe, is that, we have a very short amount of time on this earth.
It's very short.
It's very short. And having a sense of purpose and feeling fulfilled, and this idea of the happiness of pursuit, whatever that is for you, is the way to go. It's the way to make you enjoy, the process, the journey. So whatever that is for you, whether it's men's mental health, whether it's, targeting different communities and creating that representation, whether it's, I don't know, maybe business, maybe, you're an entrepreneur and you want to help people understand the entrepreneurship world.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Everyone has something that they're itching to get out there. And I want to ask you, what do you hope to achieve from your podcast?
How much time you got? A lot. But I think the biggest goal here is to start to inspire other people to have these conversations. It's to inspire more men to be open with themselves. To motivate more men to accept that it's okay to not be okay. That you can have these conversations with people and you're not any less of a man for it. You could still be the 3-piece power suit guy on Bay Street and still go and talk to your best friend and say, man, I'm really anxious today because there's a promotion coming up and I don't know if I'm good enough for it. That doesn't make you less of a man. You could be the professional athlete who accepts that you're never, your skill set is just not going to be at the level that you want it to be, but you're still really good at what you do, and it's okay. And if we can inspire one extra person, if we can, if we can prevent one more man from not taking his life through these conversations, then we've achieved everything we wanted to achieve. There's no way to measure it. We'll never know. But if somehow, some way, one less man takes his life, one more man seeks help, then we've accomplished what we set out to do.
I love that. That is very powerful, my friend. And there's not a doubt in my mind, you are helping so many different guys out there. And I hope that people who are listening to this, whether you're a man, woman, non-binary, you are listening to this and you are getting some incredible insights. I know I have, and I want to thank you once again. And before we conclude, I want to ask you the best piece of advice. What was the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I said a little bit earlier, take this current moment in your life and then think to yourself, would the younger version of you look into the future at this moment and be proud of who you are today? And would the future version of you look back on this current version of you and be proud of who you are today? And if the answer is no to either of those questions, then you have work to do. You need to do something to improve your life.
That is some good advice, my friend. And now on the flip side, what is the worst piece of advice you've ever received?
Man up. Because that typically means shut up. It means bury whatever you're feeling, and it's not healthy. It's really not.
It's not.
And if you heed that advice, you're only hurting yourself, because it'll come out one way or another. It'll come out, you'll end up ruining a relationship you really care for. You'll get yourself into trouble at work. You'll hurt yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually.
Man up equals shut up. That is very true. And that was something to remember. And again, Samir, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you. This is incredible. You're doing amazing work.
Thank you, my man. Same to you.
Please keep it up. It's needed in this community. So please keep it up. Don't stop. Don't listen to anybody who tells you otherwise. You guys are doing powerful things.
I appreciate it. Likewise, Anjad. And I want to leave the last few words for you to tell the audience where they can find Gent's talk, how they can subscribe, where they can follow Samir Mourani, because this man is full of wisdom, and I hope more and more people listen to him.
Thank you. I think of myself as just a regular muggle, so I don't think of myself as
and
anything.
He's humble too.
No, I really don't. Life humbled me. I'm gonna put it that way. But you can find me at Samir Mourani. Obviously, that's just my full name. Keep it simple. But for Gent's talk, Gent's post on Instagram, it's Gent's post, because the publication is what powers the podcast. On Spotify, Apple, and anywhere podcasts are available, it's Gent's talk. And if you are on an Air Canada flight, please tune in. Love to hear your thoughts on every episode. You can stream them anywhere. And that's it for now. We're going to see where else we'll show up.
All right, guys, please don't forget to subscribe to Yalla, Let's Talk. You can find us on Spotify. You can find us on Apple Podcast and Rami, Anchor, and YouTube, and at Yalla, Let's Talk Instagram and TikTok. Yalla, bye.